Thank you very much. It's great to be here. And firstly, I would like to state my solidarity with David Miller. I think there has been some great uh, work in supporting him, but I think that one particular point, and I'm sure that others will deal with other points, but one particular point which I don't think he's adequately been defended upon is the convergence of interests and Zionist involvement in the propagating of Islamophobia around the world. This is verifiable, documented fact in a book that he worked on with Tom Mills and others, Nazanin Masumi and others. There is a fantastic chapter by Sarah Marusek, which goes in forensic detail into how 75% of the organizations which fund think tanks that produce this irrationalizing narrative about Muslims around the world, from Middle East Forum to others, 75% of the organizations that fund them also fund the building of Israeli settlements. If we were to talk about in this country two main figureheads of Islamophobia, many would say Tommy Robinson and Katie Hopkins. Well, not enough real critical thinking was applied when looking at who funded the Free Tommy campaign and who paid for Tommy Robinson's legal fees during that process. It was Middle East Forum, the same organization that has produced work that Anders Breivik quoted 13 times in his manifesto when he murdered 77 people. The director of Middle East Forum is Greg Roman, a former employee of the Israeli Ministry of Defense and the Foreign Ministry. Tommy Robinson was also a Shillman Fellow. He was, according to his former employee, Lucy Brown, given £10,000 per month by big tech billionaire Robert Shillman. Robert Shillman formerly was on the board of directors for the Friends of the IDF. He also funds the Christians United for Israel, the Jewish National Fund, and the Zionist Organization of America. Tommy Robinson said clearly when he went to the West Bank and the Golan Heights and he posed on the back of an IDF tank holding a weapon, later on he said that he would fight for Israel if there was a war. This was not given any real critical attention by the media in this country. We look at Katie Hopkins and know that she was also funded by Robert Shillman and David Horowitz. If we look deeper at a character like Sheldon Adelson, now much was made of his funding for Israeli settlements, giving over 100 million over the space of 4 years, funding organizations like Birthright Israel, Christians United for Israel, Jewish National Fund, Zionist Organization of America. But less was made of his funding for organizations like Memory, the Foundation for Defense of Democracy, and CAMRA, all organizations that have pushed out Islamophobic, non-peer-reviewed studies all across the internet. The Marcus Foundation is another one that has given tens of millions to Islamophobic organizations and also to Israeli settlement organizations. That leads us to Paul E. Singer, top Republican donor, billionaire in the US, who through his foundation has funded Birthright Israel, Friends of the IDF, the Israel Independence Fund, but also on top of that has funded the NGO Monitor in Jerusalem, the European Foundation for Democracy, and Memory. All of these groups are identified by Sarah Marusek in her fantastic chapter as part of the Islamophobia industry. Paul Singer has also gone about setting up something called Startup National Central. Now, this organization is built to combat BDS by feeding into major tech companies, employees of former employees of Unit 8200 in the IDF. They have, and this is Paul Singer in direct cooperation with major figures in the Israeli government, working to put these people in their place. There's a brilliant article by Whitney Webb that went into this in serious detail. What you have is a situation where they've identified over 13 former employees of Unit 8200 currently in Facebook and more in organizations like Google and Microsoft. What we see in terms of the parameters of debate around the plight of Palestinians in this country, in France, in Germany, is actually an extension of the censorship that has been applied to Palestinians and even children. You've seen between 2015 and 2016, over 150 arrests of Palestinians due to their Facebook posts expressing opinions on the Palestinian uprising. You've also seen the Israeli government cyber unit set up in 2015 requesting over thousands of posts to be removed and accounts also to be removed from Facebook. And mainly they are accounts belonging to Palestinians. 85% of those requests were acquiesced to by the social media companies. The Palestinian Prisoners Study Center found that between 2015 and 2018, over 500 Palestinians, among them children, were arrested for incitement due to things that they posted on social media, with specific attention paid to Facebook. If we look at what people are being punished for saying publicly now, we do not see that much of a difference between the pronouncements of figures like Jabotinsky, Theodore Herzl, and even Ben Gurion pre the establishment of Israel. You know, of course, it was Jabotinsky that said clearly that no population would willingly submit to a colonial project, and therefore it had to be imposed by force. There is no such precedent, he said. The native populations, civilized or uncivilized, have always stubbornly resisted the colonialists, irrespective of whether they were civilized or savage. You know, there was lively debate about the nature of Zionism prior to the establishment of Israel. Yusuf al-Kabir, a lawyer from Iraq of Jewish Baghdadi background, described Zionism as militant archaeology. He said the following: reconstruction of historical geography, if accepted as practical theory, would, for instance, bring the case to ground and provide a recognized legal basis for any group of people to displace another. If the legal basis is accepted, there remains nothing but to work out history in detail for a suitable epoch. And everyone knows that modern science can do anything. Moreover, if one goes back reconstituting history 2,000 years back, there is no reason why one should not go back still further, say 4,000 or 5,000 years, and presently have the world ruled by militant archaeology. Obviously, we know that Theodore Herzl said clearly that for Europe, we would form part of a bulwark against Asia. There we would serve as the advanced post of civilization against barbarism. When he came to London, he delivered a speech in 1899 where he said, and so I should think that here in England, the Zionist idea, which is a colonial one, should be easily and quickly understood in England. And this is the most modern form of that. We also know that Theodore Herzl was very interested in seeking the support of Cecil Rhodes, trying to appeal to him on a shared basis for the colonial projects. Also, I have seen recently that there is an attempt that in retrospect to sort of Martin Buberize the Zionist movement. Figures like Martin Buber was a spiritual Zionist who was not state-centric about his idea of what the Israeli state should be, or what the yeshuv, the settlement should become. However, this was never somebody with more than 100 or so followers. He was not a big leader of people. To try to define Zionism as it was seen by Martin Buber, or even as we have seen more recently, which is a great injustice, Yemeni and Iraqi and Moroccan people that came to Israel after its establishment, and in the Yemeni case, some of them were among the very first immigration of people. In the case of Yemenis, there were thousands of Yemeni Israelis who had their children taken by the Israeli government and given to other families. Some of those parents were shown were shown supposed graves of their children. It's only come out, there's been 3 investigations, and the Israeli state has decided that there has been no wrongdoing. But they have sealed the documents of that investigation until 2071. Now, to try and now weaponize what Ilan Shohat calls the Jewish victims of Zionism as somehow representative of the Zionist project, to me, is akin to saying because prisoners were taken to Australia, that somehow Captain Cook was not a colonizer. You cannot use things that in such a crude way. So just before I finish off, as I'm aware the time is limited, several days ago, I interviewed Ahed Tamimi, who began protesting against Israeli incursions into her village following the attacks upon her family. Now, when she detailed to me what she was exposed to through the process of being arrested, as hundreds of other Palestinian children are yearly, it struck me how merely recounting what she suffered today in the supposed opposition that we have in this country, that discourse, that reality would be muzzled and would be labeled somehow racist by merely describing that. Are we to tell somebody like her cousin Jenna Jihad, who even began being active because of the murder of several of her relatives by the IDF, she began filming the protests and became a journalist at the age of 7 and taught herself English to be able to reach the rest of the world, and now is in a situation where she sees herself and her friends censored by Facebook? Are we to tell her that her lived experience is somehow racist? Of course not, and never. And that is why we must always stand with those like David, who has for years and years and years put so much work and sweat of his brow into investigating the contours of power. Because if it's David Miller today, then it's the rest of us tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Loki. That was a fascinating, sobering, and indeed sad analysis there. Thank you so much. I hope we can come back for questions later.
Yes, thank you very much. I think it is essential that we educate ourselves as much as possible about the ways in which power is able to astroturf and disguise its agency, because essentially that's what David's work has focused on in other sectors of the world, but also on this particular issue. Somebody said, can we get a shout out for the Palestine Action campaigners and activists who have been impeding the passage of power from Elbit Systems factories, or factories used to produce weaponry for Elbit Systems? It's worth remembering that those brave activists are stepping along a lineage, a proud lineage across the world of those who have taken their civil disobedience out into the sphere that it needs to be. Elbit Systems are known for making cluster munitions, which are banned by international law, white phosphorus shells, which were used against Palestinian populations. All of these things have been condemned by international law. The targeting of civilians is illegal according to Geneva Conventions. They've also been involved in the apartheid wall and got part of the $2.5 billion project on building a wall between the US and Mexico as well. But let's not forget, it's about 17 years since the International Court of Justice said Israel building that barrier was in fact illegal. So what we see are those who are, and the UK is bound by the International Arms Trade Treaty to work out whether the things that it is signing or giving the stamp for exports for are likely to be used in human rights violations. Well, we've had clear evidence that Israel is likely to use these things in human rights violations, and these brave activists have put their futures and have put themselves on the line to support and protect Palestinian life as much as they can. And so they deserve our solidarity and our support. And there's 2 of them who are currently in prison now. So please look up Palestine Action and support them in what they are doing. And everybody has a part to play. Perhaps that's a role for others. But again, the precedent that has been set is when people have been brought into court and charged with things like this, like disabling the factories. What it has done is flipped the accuser and accused dynamic and puts Israeli war crimes on trial. And so that's why you've seen from the Raytheon 9 to others, you have not seen people convicted of these crimes, because all the court cases is an opportunity to show Israeli war crimes for what they are. So I would invite more people to take part in civil disobedience and more people to support those who do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Loki. We'll put details of that when we contact people afterwards. Moshe?